Okay, somebody refresh my memory. Where are we on the Sissy Harrison case?
We had just ended with my interview for the DCF social worker.
So who? Stephanie, right?
Yeah, we have the GAL left, Sissy, and Grandma.
Okay.
And I think that's it.
Jim is grandma. What did he tell me? I think he's.
Grandma broke a hip.
Grandma got rid of
No,
her.
I think he is.
Three grandmas back in the hospital.
Yeah, I think he said he couldn't make it to the 11, but that he'd be here by juvenile law. Something was going on with him. Okay, all right. So, what's the name? Jonathan had work. So it's you, John, for Sissy, Joe and Mike for DCF, Laura for the children, and so either Joe or Mike, which one of you is going to call Stephanie?
All right, I'll call.
You will? Okay. Just make sure when you're sort of next to each other that you're projecting so everybody can hear. Okay.
I'll try to be nice enough.
Okay. Oh, here comes Jim. Good. We're just starting with the GAL testimony, so you're not ready. All right.
We'd like to call the garden ad litem. Will you state your name for the record?
Stephanie Tompkins,
And what is your occupation?
guardian ad litem,
How long have you worked in the profession?
10 years,
And how many times have you previously been a garden ad litem?
well over 100 times.
And how did you become associated with this family?
Became associated with this case because there was question whether or not the parenting skills were adequate to continue parenting for Ms. Harrison.
Okay. And were you assigned by the court, or how did you get assigned to this case?
Sideline.
Okay. And I'd like to focus on what you know about Ms. Harrison. Is Ms. Harrison employed?
Ms. Harrison, as of what I know today, she is still yet to have been employed since I've been involved in the case.
Okay.
She's not employed.
And can you tell me a little bit about the reputation and character of Ms. Harrison?
Well, the reputation of Ms. Harrison is that she's gotten some very difficult times in her life, and she hasn't always been compliant with school. And from my understanding, she continues not to be in school at this time. She does have a few good relationships, one being with her great-grandmother. And there's been some issues about whether or not she's able to function on a mental capacity that is fitting of a child her age.
Okay. Can you discuss the physical ability of Ms. Harrison to care for the twins?
Physically, meaning health-wise, is that what you mean?
Yeah, like is she physically able to care for the child?
That's kind of a tricky question, but I'll say for the record, physically, as in her body, she's able to, but housing-wise, she doesn't have a residence of her own, so therefore she doesn't have a residence for her children.
How about the mental ability of Ms. Harrison to care for the twins?
That has been questionable. According to the records, she has had some issues with mental health. She has had a terrible traumatized childhood, and this seems to be linking over into her teenage years. She has some past history of suicide ideation, even though they decided that she was not suicide at that time. That's still been on the radar as a question. She's had some bouts of depression and anxiety, and she still seems to struggle from depression as she does not go to school or attempts to go to work.
Okay. Can you describe any facts regarding the fitness of Ms. Harrison to care for the twins?
As I said previously, the main concern is not the physical ability, meaning that, can she still change the baby's pampers? Yes, she can. Can she feed the children? Yes, she can. But her mental state has been seen as unstable, as well as the physical state of her being able to care for her own self. The records show that even if she was out of the foster care home at this time, she would be in a residential setting, and that is definitely not a setting that is conducive for twins of that age to grow up watching their mom in a residential home setting.
Okay, I just discussed Ms. Harrison's living situation. Is there any immediate sort of future plans of a different living situation for her?
As I said, the plan right now is for Ms. Harrison to be transferred over to a residential facility. She'll have a shared living space with other residents. It's no question that she would eventually want to be on her own, but it's yet to be determined how long it's going to take Ms. Harrison to get her own treatment and become stable enough to live independently.
And does Ms. Harrison attend school on a regular basis?
She does not.
Does Ms. Harrison have any family support in place to assist with effectively parenting the kids?
The only support that Ms. Harrison says that she has at this point is her great-grandmother. The other supports, which were her mother, father, they have since left, and there's not many family and friends that she can also count on. So I would say no, she does not have the support that a normal teenage 16-year-old would have at this time.
Okay, let's focus your attention now on the relationship between Ms. Harrison and the twins. How many times a week or month have you seen Ms. Harrison?
Typically, I will see Ms. Harrison on the days, usually once a week.
Okay, and how many times per week or month have you seen the twins, Carol and Sandy?
Usually the same amount of time. It was originally scheduled for once a month, but we've been able to see them more frequently because of the concerns.
Okay, and can you describe for us your opportunities to observe them together?
Ms. Harrison is initially playful with the children and seemingly concerned about their safety and well-being, but not long before the session goes on, she's on a cell phone, she's inattentive, and the twins are basically left on their own to care for themselves during her visit, is what I would observe.
Okay, and where do you normally see the parent and the child interact?
During the supervised visit.
Okay. And when the twins are with Ms. Harrison, does Ms. Harrison actively engage her children or provide toys or activities for the children to play with?
She does not initially bring any kind of items that would indicate her seeing her children. In times past, I've seen parents bring gifts. I've seen parents bring coloring books and crayons. I have never saw her bring any of those items into the sessions with her children.
Are there any reasons you believe Ms. Harrison should not have custody of the twins?
The primary concern is not to deprive Ms. Harrison of her parenting abilities or skills, but at this point, she has shown to be inconsistent and unstable in her own mental state, and there's a concern that the twins will be neglected, not purposefully, but because of the mental health concerns that we see Ms. Harrison has, as well as the instability of her housing situation, as well as her ability to maintain employment and care for the children. We are just trying to be preventative. So at this time, I believe that there are other opportunities for the twins to be raised in a healthier environment, more stable condition, and that's what we, as a guardian I would recommend.
You mentioned a healthier environment. Were you able to observe the twins away from their mother?
Yes, I was able to observe.
And where were you able to do that?
I was able to do that at the Jackson's house where they reside.
Okay, let's turn our attention to what you know about Angela Jackson. Can you describe the employment and income of Mrs. Jackson?
From my understanding, Ms. Jackson has a relatively median household income. She has a stable job where she goes 5 days a week consistently. There's no history, in my questioning, there's no history of absences, drugs, any type of concerns that will alert us to be concerned about the safety or well-being of the twins.
Okay, and how about the reputation and character of Ms. Jackson in her community?
She's seen as a positive figure, very encouraging to others, helpful within the community, attending church once in a while.
Okay, and is there any interference with the physical ability of Mrs. Jackson to care for the child?
No, she seems to be in relatively good health, both physically as well as mentally.
Okay. And how's the relationship between Ms. Harrison and Mrs. Jackson?
There's a fairly decent relationship between the two. Ms. Jackson is appropriate towards Ms. Harrison and vice versa, for the most part. The concern is when there's a disconnect with who's the parent, and it confuses the children at times.
Okay. Let's turn our attention to the times that you've interacted with Ms. Jackson and the twins. How often have you seen them together?
I've seen them quite a few times together, but I try to go there at least once a week or once every other week.
Okay. And where do you normally see them together?
Usually within the home. We do home visit.
In the twins' home, the foster home, or Ms. Jackson's home?
Mrs. Jackson.
Okay. And how does Mrs. Jackson and the twins act towards each other?
Ms. Jackson is always appropriate, very loving. Twins seem to be comfortable around her. They seem to feel safe. They seem to be happy. She provides them with toys and snacks and the care and attention that a normal parent would give to the twins.
Okay. And when you observed Ms. Jackson's house, did you ever observe the father, Robert Jackson?
I don't recall seeing him too often, but if he were there, there were no red flags raised.
Okay. And is there any reason you believe Mrs. Jackson should not have custody of the twins?
There's no reason at all. It seems to be a stable home, and the relationship I do know between the two parents there are pretty much a stable household.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Mrs. C. Harrison, you have witness? John?
Hello. Just have a few questions for you. Sissy is 16 years old, right?
That's correct.
Now, in your opinion, do 16-year-old girls tend to have jobs or employment?
It depends on their upbringing.
I mean, for the most part, 15, 16-year-old girls have employment, as far as you know, as
15, no, but 16 most likely.
16 sometimes.
Yeah,
So not all 16-year-old girls have jobs, right?
not all.
Okay. What kind of job would Sissy have if she were to apply for a job somewhere at 16?
16, usually they have jobs for retail, grocery stores, fast food,
Okay.
such. And there are occasional positions for clerks at that age.
Okay, so it's perfectly acceptable to, that some, if not most, 16-year-old girls don't have jobs, right?
I would never say most or some. I would say it depends.
So you think most 16-year-old girls should have jobs?
It should. You're asking me?
I'm asking.
Oh,
Should most 16-year-old girls have jobs?
I believe they should.
You think they should?
Yeah, I believe they should. Let me just clarify that. If the 16-year-old lives in a household where everything is provided for them, then in that particular case, they may want to focus in on their studies. In the case of Sissy, because she's not working, she needs to provide for her children, and she's not going to school. She would probably benefit from some type of employment to support herself as well as her baby. So in my opinion, someone who has children, even at 16, yes, they should work. They should work to provide for their children.
Okay. Your experience with Sissy, you mentioned that she wasn't complying with the schools, she wasn't really attending and things like that. What do you think that was a result of, why she wasn't?
Well, what I referred to was that she was not currently attending school. She did have a previous record of going to school. She had a previous record. There were two stories. The first story says that she was not complying with school. There was a truancy officer assigned to her because of her absentees. But then she turned it around, and she was actually attending school and doing fairly well in school. When she moved away by the foster parent, if I'm not mistaken, she moved away from her current school that she was going to, that she was very faithful towards. However, 16-year-olds tend to go to school, and they should all go to school.
Okay. Does her past and her rocky past of being bounced around in foster homes, would that have anything to do with her non-compliance with school policies?
It would have something to do with her ability to make decisions based on...
Let me ask it a different way. If you take an average student and they've bounced around between 7 foster homes since 5th grade, would you expect that student to have the same level of integrity of going to school as someone who hasn't had that instability in their life?
There may be some resistance, but this also answers to the need for someone to supervise her, to enforce her to be able to go to school, because she still needs school.
So would you agree that certain elements that were out of her control might have contributed to her non-compliance with these school policies?
From my understanding, it was just the distance of being taken away from her current school. However, wherever she lives now, she has access and the ability to attend school.
Okay. And when she was in high school, she rarely attended 9th grade, I believe.
Yeah.
Yet her school advanced her to the 10th grade despite failing grades. Do you think that's a good school policy, to advance students who fail and to make them go to an advanced class?
I've seen that happen. I'm not very familiar with it, but I've seen that happen.
As far as Sissy's depression goes, what do you think that stems from?
I believe it would more than likely stem from multiple foster care settings, home environment, original home environment, parents on abuse and neglect. Those all stem. Rejection from her own biological parents would probably promote that level of depression, and probably past relationships personally that she's had with boyfriends.
And you mentioned her lack of support. One of the only people left in her life is her grandmother, besides her now 2 kids. Wouldn't you agree that some people in this world don't have any support at all?
Yes.
So is it safe to say that at least Sissy has her grandmother to fall back on from time to time, if not more often?
I think that it's a great thing for her to have only her grandmother. The concern with the grandmother is that the illness, her grandmother's own personal illness, so if that support was to go away, there will be concern about who else would support Sissy at this point.
Has Sissy attended any educational classes since being pregnant?
Yes.
And how was her attendance at those classes?
Those classes were good, as I recall. She did well with those particular classes, but once again, once she moved away from that into the foster home, she stopped attending all schools and all educational programs.
Was that a reason of All right, so she showed willingness to try to better herself as a mother for her children, correct?
At the time, but there's a loss at this point.
Okay.
There's a lack of
And what was
interest.
the actual reason why she stopped going to classes? Was it a transportation issue?
I believe that she stopped going to classes because of transportation. However, there was alternative educational opportunities within the area, in the neighborhood where she lived. But she did not pursue those options either.
Would an average 16-year-old girl know where to look for those opportunities?
No, it would be up to the care provider,
Okay, so she did the best she could, right?
under the circumstances.
Thank you. Further questions?
Sure. Laura?
Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
So you've worked with Sissy and you understand her situation. Do you believe that people can be rehabilitated?
Yes.
Have you read Ms. Pacese's recommendations regarding Sissy, the project plan?
You can remind me of them.
Okay, so it's the recommendation dispositional plan. And one of the items, it says that Sissy should participate in therapy at least twice weekly. There would also be an intake, and if it was determined that she needed more intensive treatments, she would be allowed that. So that's in Century Calling. Do you recall it earlier in her, since she's been with the department, how she had progressed from a rehabilitative home to a group home?
I don't recall how her personal progression was, because as I do recall, she went from doing not so well to well, and now she's back to not so well. And that indicates to me that there's some things that will trigger her for not doing well. And that is the department's concern, is that when things are well, they're well, but what happens as a parent when you have things unexpected, then they don't go so well. And is she able to handle that as a parent, as an adult, as a student, as well as someone who's working in the community?
Do you recall her most recent kind of brush with suicidal thoughts? Do you recall what prompted that?
I believe that it was the taking away of her children that triggered it.
That's correct. And they relocated the children to Boston and her 30 miles north to Billerica.
Yeah.
With regarding the job, you know, I'm sure you're aware that in 2008 the market crashed, and it's been a very unstable economy in the state of Massachusetts, along with, you know, the rest of the union. Being up in Billerica, are you familiar with the market dynamics of, you know, the ability for a 16-year-old girl to find a job?
At this point, it's, even though there was a market crash, the jobs that are available to her, person of her skills, there could be a position. The only issue with that is that she never made the attempts to do so, to even support herself to do so. So therefore, that's a concern, that you have children, you don't go to school, and you're not making an effort to work. And typically, people who suffer with depression, they don't want to work immediately, or even at all, and that's a concern.
Does Sissy know how long she'll be in Billerica?
I don't believe she does.
Do you know how long she'll be in Billerica?
It hasn't been determined yet.
Right. It's probably very difficult to find a job knowing you might be pulled tomorrow. Would you say that was correct?
Knowing that you
You might be pulled from your foster home tomorrow.
I don't think that would be a difficult thing. Keeping a job, keeping a job may be the difficult part, but knowing that you may or may not be here tomorrow, that shouldn't prevent you from attempting to find a job. Because the idea of finding a job makes an effort and imposes a responsibility on a parent that says, I'm going to try and make the effort to make sure that my children have what they need. And there's also no indication that she applied for any state assistance or any type of support for herself. There has been no or little effort on Sissy's part to make any means of responsibility towards herself or towards her children. that is a major concern.
So you don't think that knowing you might not be somewhere tomorrow impacts whether you choose to go look for a job or not?
It shouldn't, but I don't know. I'm not in her shoes at this point, so it could possibly mean that there is a lack of motivation to do so, but it shouldn't hinder anyone.
Did you ever move as a child?
Twice maybe.
Do you know anyone who moved, you know, someone whose parents were in the service, or
Laura, a little louder, please.
someone whose parents were in the service, or maybe a corporation where they transferred them around?
Yes.
Quite a bit. You are familiar.
Yes.
Did they find it hard to move from school to school?
Yes. Once again, on the part about the school, usually, even if the person was in a military situation or they were moving with their parents, usually at 16-year-old, you do not make your own efforts to attend school. However, the person who is in charge of you usually takes care of that. However, if you are 16, you know that you're supposed to go to school, there could be at least an inquiry about, hey, when am I going to go to school? And that was not done. That did not take place.
Right, so probably, and I'll get to this in a moment, but the whole report from the social worker and the recommendations with the plans, including school, probably address that like a normal 16-year-old would have, you know, parents or guardians watching over them. It's probably difficult to do that on your own, when you say, when you move, you know, every few months.
It is difficult to do that on your own.
Thank you. A couple more questions. So the father of the twins is 17 years old. Does he go to school?
I have very little information about the father, but I would imagine he does, but I don't have much information about the father.
Because he's only a year older, so
Yeah.
I think we would probably expect him to be going to school.
Yeah,
Does he work? Do
No.
you know that? He does not work.
I don't know for him to have to.
So he's the father of the children.
Yeah.
Clearly, we would expect him to have the same responsibilities towards supporting these children getting
Yes,
education.
and that's part of the concern, that the only one qualified at this moment would be his mom, which is Ms. Jackson.
So does he live at that home
He's in and out.
in terms of living there? So do we know anything about him, his record? Does he have a record?
From my understanding, I don't have the files in front of me, so I can't recall. I'll have to look that up. But I know she had a history of choosing men who were not appropriate. I'll just have to look that up. But I'm not sure if that is.
So I would think that's a concern of having him have free access to his mother's home and him possibly being abusive, putting the twins in that home.
With there being a stable home between the parents, Ms. Jackson and her husband, there's a low tolerance for any type of abusive behaviors. There's been no concern indicated by Ms. Jackson. If there was a concern at all, it would be the concern between the two, the boyfriend and Ms. Harrison.
Is it fair to say that Mrs. Jackson is very motivated to have these children in her home?
She is.
So it's possible you don't have all the facts about her son? Correct.
Could be.
Okay, my next question is, you had mentioned that Mrs. Jackson works.
Yes.
So where are the children going to be while she's at work?
At the daycare,
Okay, so,
which is normal for people working.
I agree. So in the social workers' recommendations, you know, one of the things is that the children would be in childcare while Chrissy was getting education and job training. So during the day, is it fair to say that Mrs. Jackson having them in daycare and Sissy having them in daycare are essentially the same?
That part is the same.
Okay. And is it also fair to say that Sissy will have housing at the Crittenden Hastings house? And well, I'll stop there. Is it fair to say she will have housing there with the girls?
I'm sorry, rephrase the question.
Is it fair to say that Sissy will have housing provided to her at the Crittenden Hastings house?
At the residential,
Yes.
Sissy, it does indicate that Sissy will have housing. The question was the appropriateness of the twins living there with her. That was the question that was the appropriateness, and then there was no length of time set that Sissy would live there, indicating that the children would perhaps grow there as opposed to where they could currently go to a nice home in a nice neighborhood with two loving parents.
Well, and another way to look at that is that Sissy and the girls are safe there until, as Ms. Facisa said, she's secured permanent housing and is ready to live independently. So there's a backdrop in place for her. Would you agree?
There's a backdrop in place, but the timing of it is indefinite, and the ability for Sissy to turn it around is undetermined, even though it's possible. So it's more so like a preventative way, and I will add that one of the benefits for the twins to be with Miss Jackson is that she still will have access to be able to visit and watch her children.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Redirect, Your Honor?
Yes.
Just for the record, are there plenty of cases where people like Chrissy are not rehabilitated?
There are cases where people do not recover from depression or mental illnesses because of the trauma and the severity of the trauma and the inability to recover and become at a normal state to fit in with the normal population.
And when Chrissy had made the move to Billerica, she stopped attending any sort of parenting classes, is that correct?
She stopped.
And,
She stopped.
and do you know the availability of continuing education programs in the area of Billerica?
There are at least two in the area. There's no indication whether the great-grandmother inquired about such, and there's no indication that Sissy herself said, hey, I would like to continue.
So it's safe to say that Chrissy's not continuing her education after the move to Billerica was a matter of choice?
I believe it was a matter of choice. It also may indicate, if it's not by choice, it also may indicate that the form of depression may have gotten worse, which means that there's, if you in the form of depression, there's a lack of motivation, there's disorganization included in that diagnosis, so it may indicate a mental illness has increased as opposed to it being totally her fault that she's not going to school. So it could be either of the two, choice or neither.
And it's been established that you are familiar with the Pacias report, is that correct?
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, would you believe that after reading the report that that its focus is more on Chrissy as opposed to the children?
It is focused on Chrissy, but there is a big concern about the children as well.
Can I get your opinion on this quote? The above recommendation will be essential to Sissy's success and healthy development as a young adult. That's how Ms. Pacias summed up her recommendation. Do you have any opinion about that?
Can you rephrase
Sure.
because I'm not sure where
She summed up her recommendation by saying that her recommendations are essential to Chrissy's development as a young adult and has no mention of her development as a parent to the children.
Okay.
Do you think that has any? Do you think that speaks to anything?
I think it
regarding the report?
speaks to what I've been saying the entire time, that the biggest concern is with Chrissy being able to function independently and in a physical as well as mental state that she can be an asset to herself first.
Well, here's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Ms. Pacias investigated the case.
Yeah.
You investigated the case.
Yeah.
And you came up with two completely different conclusions.
Yeah.
Ms. Pacias, in her report, says that her recommendations are essential to Chrissy's development as a young adult, and your recommendations are based upon what?
My recommendations are based on the safety of the children primarily. That's the purpose of determination.
So,
Right.
so is it safe to say that your recommendation is taking into account the children's well-being more so than Ms. Pacias' report?
just have a couple of questions. You testified that Sissy sees her children once a week.
Yes, originally I thought it was supposed to be.
Right. So she's been seeing them once a week. They're toddlers now.
Yep.
Mm. So they recognize her.
Yes.
They do recognize her.
Oh,
Okay.
there was
And,
Um,
I'm making this up.
Okay.
Some of the toddlers.
Continue it,
You know,
yeah,
they can
continue
be
it.
toddlers.
Yeah.
They want
They're like
9
one,
months or
Just trying to
so.
follow along.
Yeah,
They're like
yeah,
1
going
years
on
old.
1, say.
Yeah.
Sissy has been in the care of the department ever since she was about 9 years old, correct?
That's correct.
And so some of the efforts that Sissy should be making are also assisted in terms of, the department's responsibility to offer services, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And some of the efforts that she's made, she's had highs and lows, correct?
That's correct.
And so she has been positive with at least some of the services that DCF has provided.
That's correct.
And it's possible that as she, matures now that she has children, that she could avail herself more of these services in the future.
That's correct. If she puts the effort forward, yes.
Okay.
But it's also possible that she may not, because she may not recover from her illness.
And just to clarify, you were appointed for the best interest of the children, correct? Because I didn't hear that term,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming that.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay.
Sorry.
All right, thank you. You can step down. Okay, so the department's resting.
Yes, we rest, thank you.
All right. And now, John, you're probably going to call Sissy as your first witness.
Okay, call Sissy to the stand. Hi, Sissy.
Hello.
So, would you consider yourself a loving and caring person?
Yes,
Do you love your grandmother?
very much.
Does she love you?
Yes,
Have you experienced abuse and neglect throughout your upbringing?
yes.
Was any of that your fault, or was it out of your hands?
It's out of my hands.
Okay. You were reunited with your grandmother at one point. I believe you were in high school around the 9th grade.
Can I stop for a minute? Direct examination. So what, when, where, what, how,
Okay,
not
so,
questions that are leading.
So, when you were in 9th grade, you skipped school a lot.
No, you're still doing it now.
Okay.
Ask her to tell you things.
Did you skip school a lot in the 9th
No,
grade?
no, you didn't, no.
So how do I say
Did
that?
you attend school?
Did you attend school?
No.
Okay. And when faced with the threat of possibly losing your great-grandmother losing custody of you, did you start attending school?
Yes,
And why was that?
because I didn't want to leave my grandmother.
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Because I didn't want to leave my grandmother.
Right, okay. Because you loved her, right?
Yes.
Objection.
No, Jonathan's not here. So, all right, so what qualities, could you tell us about some of your qualities that you might possess that would make you a fit mother? Is that bad too? They're all gonna be bad.
Answer?
Do you love your children? Tell me about your relationship with your children. I don't know, describe your visits.
All right.
Questions like
Can you
that.
describe your visits?
Yes. I feel overwhelmed when I go to see my children because I'm not used to them. I'm not around them a lot. I only get to see them about once a week. For the most part, I like playing with them.
Okay. What kind of feelings come up when you see your kids on your limited visitation?
A little anxious,
Anxious?
nervous.
Are you excited to see them?
Yes,
Do you miss them?
I love them.
Miss them and love them. How would you describe a mother's love for their children in your case?
I never really experienced much love growing up, and I want to be different for my children.
Right. Can you tell us about your upbringing a little bit?
I don't have a good relationship with my father because he left us. Then my mother used to abuse us, and she went to
jail for drugs. And that's when I started living with my grandmother. And then my grandmother became very sick, and my sisters and I got sent to foster homes where we were sent separately. So I haven't seen them.
Would it be, this is probably wrong, would it be unfair to judge a mother based on the actions of her parents and her upbringing as far as predicting what kind of mother she might be to
Yes.
her kids?
Yes.
Okay. As far as your education goes, was there certain steps you took when you found out you were pregnant as far as wanting to be a better mother?
I took parenting classes.
And how was your attendance at those classes?
I went every day up until I gave birth.
Why did you stop going after you gave birth?
It was too far. They moved me to Limerick, and I didn't have transportation to go to class.
DCF wouldn't provide transportation.
Yes, sir.
That's a shame. Otherwise, had it not been for the transportation, you definitely would have gone, right?
Probably not every day, but I would have gone.
You know, you're still asking leading questions, right? We're just letting them go.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I'll figure it out eventually.
Okay.
No comment.
Laura can chime in too, since he doesn't have co-counsel with him.
When you were separated from your sisters, what kind of feelings did you have?
My anxiety went through the roof. I did not feel a sense of home or family at all. So I was also taken away from my grandma.
Did you have a similar set of feelings when you were separated from your baby girls?
Yes.
What's it like moving multiple homes once a month and trying to attend new schools?
It's very difficult for me. I don't have a sense of security. Finding who I am is very difficult for me because I don't really have a family.
How do you feel when you walk in the door of the school that first morning?
Very insecure. I feel like everyone's staring and laughing at me.
Do you tend to know people in these communities?
No.
Have you read the report from the social worker about the recommendations?
Yes.
And what are your thoughts on that?
I like it. I feel like I could be a good parent to my baby girls as long as I have support and guidance.
And you've been at the Crittenden Hastings house before?
Yes.
And what was your attendance like when you were there?
I went every day.
And did you like it?
Yes, very much.
Did you get anything out of the program that you had attended previously?
It helped me a lot. I learned how to change diapers. I learned to be gentle with the children, learned to carry, hold the head. It taught me a lot.
And would you adhere to this program?
Yes.
Do you have any concerns about this program?
The only concern I would have would probably be being alone. I wouldn't want to be away from my family because that's the main issue that I have. I feel like that's where my anxiety stems from.
Can your grandmother visit you here?
I would hope so.
Does she still drive?
Yes.
Are you in search of employment, Sissy?
I don't really know where to look.
No, that would
And I don't really have guidance to help me find a job. I wouldn't mind working. I'm not opposed to it.
And just to go over your thoughts with school and your attendance, as far as that goes. Why were you not attending schools as often as you should have been?
Just really insecure. I wasn't going to school, so I was failing all my classes, and they still promoted me to 10th grade. I didn't understand how that could happen. I didn't really know what was going on in class.
Okay. All right, no further questions.
Cross-examination?
Hi, Sissy. Now, you grew up in a home with physical abuse, correct?
Yes,
And there was substance abuse as well?
yes,
Do you think that's had a negative impact on your life?
definitely.
How so?
I don't really know what love is. I don't know what love parents are supposed to be.
So
I
if
don't
you
have
don't, so if you don't, okay, you bounce around homes around, you bounce around a lot as a kid. It's true that you struggle to adjust,
Yes,
and when you returned to your great-grandmother's after hospitalization, the school filed a petition for truancy, correct?
yes.
And was that a result of you refusing to go to school, or was it a result of you feeling insecure, or
Refusing to go to school.
and you refused to go because you were insecure?
Yes,
Now, is it fair to say that the only reason you went back to school was because of the threat of you having to leave your grandmother's home?
yes,
Is it also true, though, that after you started attending school, you still came in late frequently?
yes,
Were you sexually active in your great-grandmother's home?
yes,
And this is when you were 14, around that age?
yes,
Okay. Would you recommend that same kind of behavior for your daughters or your younger sisters?
no,
So it's kind of a do as I say, not as I do thing?
yes,
Did your great-grandmother ever observe or confront you about the sexual activity?
that's not right.
Yes or no question?
No,
No? Yes or no? Have you attended an education program since you moved to your current residence in Billerica?
no,
And what is your reasoning for that?
no transportation.
Are you aware that there are places in the town of Billerica that do offer education programs?
No, sir. Well, I am now, I guess.
Did you make any efforts to become aware of any education programs in Billerica? So you made no efforts, okay. Are you suicidal?
No,
Have you talked about suicide in the past?
yes,
When you learned of the possibility of losing your kids, did you mention suicide at that point?
yes,
Did you mention suicide at that point? Are you threatening to commit suicide if the court permanently takes your kids away?
say again?
Are you threatening to commit suicide if the court permanently takes your kids away? Did the idea of suicide conveniently come to you
At that time?
as a result of, yeah,
Yes,
okay. Is it fair to say that you've had poor taste in romantic partners in the past?
yes,
And why is that? Was it because of physical abuse?
that's a good question. I would say yes.
And how well do you know Angela Jackson?
I mean, well enough, I guess.
And from what you know, does she pose a risk to your children if she were to become their guardian?
No,
Okay. I'm going to pass this to my co-counsel. Thank you.
You said that you frequently have difficulty with anxiety,
yes,
and in the past you've been provided with services that you've had difficulty sticking to the plan,
yes,
and you have a lot of free time on your hands now, right?
yes,
And do you use that free time to find a job or better yourself?
no,
And you said that your children are the most important thing to you, right?
yes,
But not more important than text messages? Isn't that
No.
correct? No?
our kids are more important than that.
Okay. But not when you're at visitations with them? To be on your phone frequently, right?
I'm not on my phone the whole time.
Okay, but when you have a limited amount of time to see your children throughout the week, you have a difficult time of waiting to answer those text messages while you're there with them?
No,
So you choose to do it then?
yes,
Okay. And
just have one question of Sissy. So, Sissy, if you were awarded custody of your children, what would your plan be?
Definitely find a job, try to go back to school. I would ask to live with my grandmother again, because that's where I felt most stable. And anything else that DCF could offer me, I would take. I would do whatever they told me to do, or whatever they offered to do.
Thank you, Inspector. Call your next witness.
Great Call Jim up to the stand. Grandma Jim.
Grandma Jim.
Grandma Jim, how would you describe Sissy?
Can you sort of let her identify herself, sort of where she lives and things like that first?
Identify him, like
Her.
himself?
Her.
Like herself? Or
Her.
would you please identify yourself for the court?
Yes, my name is Carly Harrison. I'm 76 years old, and I live in Rochester. And I am the great-grandmother of Sissy. I have three grandchildren. Sissy was 16, Caroline was 13, and Sandra was 12.
Could you briefly describe your experience in raising or rearing children?
Well, Lorraine, my granddaughter, she was living with me for a while, and then she had met a bum, Gary Sandra, who left her when she was 5 months pregnant with Sissy. And after Sandra was born, that bum, he took off. He never maintained contact or paid any child support. My granddaughter Lorraine had it tough. She raised the kids for the next 5 years. And after that bump left, my granddaughter really turned to drugs and alcohol. I think that him leaving caused her to get into that type of destructive behavior. She could not hold a job or care for my grandkids. I'll admit Lorraine was sometimes abusive to the kids, but she loved them. But Sandler was much worse. He would beat the kids and abuse them and all that. But I couldn't do anything. I was afraid of him.
After your experience with Lorraine, would you say that, does Sissy possess similar characteristics as Lorraine does as far as parenting skills go, in your opinion? Is that good?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Of course it is. We're gonna let it slide though, right?
No one objected.
Okay. So answer the
Can you
question.
repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. Do you think Lorraine and Sissy share similar characteristics as far as parenting skills might go, based on what you've seen with Lorraine and Sissy?
So,
Somewhat. Would you say Sissy is notorious as Lorraine, as far as the abuse and neglect and abandonment issues go?
absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Thank you. Okay. How was your experience living with Sissy the 2 times that you had custody of her, before and after you got sick?
Well, after Sissy's first grade teacher filed the abuse and neglect petition against neglect petition, the children were removed from my daughter's home. I took custody of them. I ended up taking custody of them. But then Lorraine got arrested for drugs. She was convicted of drug trafficking. And shortly thereafter, I got sick and I was hospitalized. I just couldn't take care of the kids. It broke my heart. About 16 months later, I began to feel that I wanted Sissy to live with me. And Sissy moved back in with me for the next 2.5 years. Well, she started having some truancy issues in school. She was starting to be late for school.
Were those truancy issues remedied at all?
No, she ended up getting pregnant by her boyfriend, and then she gave birth to my 2 great-granddaughters. And then she was released from the home.
Do you consider Sissy a loving person?
Absolutely.
Do you think Sissy has the willingness to become a good parent?
Yes, I do.
And you have probably the most experience out of anyone you know, that as far as living with her and experiencing her upbringing a little bit, probably better than any foster parent. Is that safe to say?
I think that would be an accuracy.
Sissy is capable of loving. Obviously, she loves you, correct?
Yes, she does.
And she
still
cares.
calls me a grandmother, or my great-grandmother.
And she cares for her two twins that she's separated from currently, right?
Yes, she does.
Would you consider her, or would? Do you think she'd make a good parent with the right training and willingness to overcome some adversities?
She is a good parent. I just think she needs some guidance. She's had a tough life.
Do you think what's generally better, children staying with their mothers or children being tossed into foster homes?
Yeah, let's get rid of that one.
Let's just take that one.
Extend yourself.
I think it was the tone that was just, all right.
Laura, want to ask a few?
I can
Go ahead.
So we know that Sissy's your family. Do you have any other family members?
Well, like two other great-grandchildren, Caroline and Sarah, they were taken away.
Yeah. And anyone else?
No, that's it.
Do you have any friends in your community or your neighborhood?
I do. I mean, I'm getting up there in years, but I still attend church frequently, and I live alone. My health is not the best that it should be.
Do you have any friends for support?
I have a couple of friends in the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. And when Sissy lived in your house, did she help like with cleaning, cooking, washing, any outside work, things like that?
Well, she was always helpful. She would run down to the store for me and get the groceries, things of that nature.
Okay. Is, in your opinion, is Sissy energetic?
Oh, absolutely.
Is she positive about life?
For the most part, yeah. So,
Okay. If Sissy were to attend this program that we're talking about and then wanted to come live with you, would she be able to come home with you and the girls? To your home?
absolutely.
And there's enough room?
Yes.
That's all I have.
You, go ahead.
That wants to go, right? You always wanted what was best for your family, right?
Yes, sir.
And you always wanted what was best for Sissy, right?
Yes.
And that's why you stepped up to the plate to provide a home for her when she was in need of a home, right?
Yes, thank you. I did do
Okay. And you want what's in the best interest of your great-great-granddaughters, right?
that. Yes.
Okay. And despite your best efforts, Sissy has had a difficult life, right?
We all have difficult lives.
Would it be fair to say, though, that her life has been more challenging than a typical 16-year-old, right?
Could you repeat the question?
It'd be fair to say that her life has been more challenging than a typical 16-year-old, right?
I don't know whether it would be or wouldn't be in this day and age.
Okay. Would it be fair to say it was more difficult than the life you had at 16?
Well, I grew up in the Depression.
Okay. It would be fair to say, though, that she's had difficulty adjusting to changes in her life.
Some.
Okay. And you would agree that Sissy's immature, right?
I would agree that she's a 16-year-old.
And at 16, it would certainly be a burden raising twins, right?
Can you repeat the question?
At 16, would you say it's a burden raising twin girls?
Oh, young man, I don't think it's a burden to ever not raise children. I don't think it would be a burden for her.
So you don't think that it's difficult to raise children? Or just not at 16?
Oh, young man, I think you're twisting my words. You said that it was a burden. Now you're saying that it's difficult. Obviously, it's difficult to raise children. Burden would be different in that when you say burden, it seems like it's troublesome for her or too difficult for her to be able to do it, or she just doesn't want to do it, versus difficult where we all have difficulties in raising our children.
Okay. Do you think that raising twins would be a challenge to also obtaining an education at age 16?
Yes, if she was doing it alone.
And you want for Sissy to get a good education, correct?
Yes.
And you also want for her to get a good job?
Yes.
And you want for her to have a loving family?
Yes.
So wouldn't you agree then that at this state, right now, it would be easier for Sissy to accomplish those things if she didn't have the extra task of raising twin girls?
No, I wouldn't agree with that, Your Honor.
So you don't think it would be easier? So you testified that it was a challenge to raise children, but it wouldn't be a greater challenge to also be trying to get an education, a new job, get a good job, and create a relationship for a loving family as well at the same time?
Sure, I'm confused. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. You stated that it is a challenge to raise children. What I'm asking is, do you think it's more of a challenge when on top of that, you're also trying to get a good education, get a good job, and find a relationship for a loving family?
That will be a challenge.
You finished?
Guys, ask a few questions.
Yep.
Did you have any rules in your home regarding sissy and boys or anything like that?
Yes, I would allow friends to stay at the house and until 9 o'clock, and then I would send them home.
Okay, so were there any, did you stipulate to sissy at all regarding anything about sex in the home? Was it not allowed, or was there no discussion?
No, we had discussions. That certainly was not allowed in my home, young man. I take offense to that.
Well, do you take offense to sissy testifying that she had sex under your nose in your home?
Well, I wouldn't know that, young man.
Now, are you aware of sissy being depressed when you were raising her, or experiencing depression?
Not any more than any other child.
Okay. Did sissy ever? Was she ever aggressive or self-destructive in your experience?
Sometimes.
Okay. And in your opinion, did sissy exhibit a poor choice in romantic partners?
My knowledge, he had one boyfriend.
Okay. And were you aware of any physical abuse that he did he physically abuse her?
Yeah, he was another one.
And if anything were to happen to you, what would Chrissy's support system consist of?
Well, I have Medicaid and Social Security.
As far as human interaction?
What do you mean if something happens if I go back to the hospital.
Yeah, well, you were hospitalized for health issues, and I'm glad to see that you're doing okay.
Thank you.
And, you know, unfortunately, life does take awful turns sometimes, and if something were to happen to you, which is a reality of life, what kind of support system would Chrissy have?
Well, something could happen to all of us, but in the meantime.
That's a nice hypothetical, but I'm asking you a direct question, and I'd like you to answer it, please.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, if something were to happen to you, what kind of support system would Chrissy have?
Well, I think DCYF has a plan in place that might be able to help, and I have friends in Neighborhood. She can certainly still stay at my house. Don't anticipate having medical issues in the next two to 3 years. I would hope not.
She would not have any family members, though?
Well, I mean, she would still have Miss Jackson. You know, Miss Jackson wanted to be part of her life. I have no issues with Miss Jackson.
And Miss Jackson is not a blood relative, correct?
Yeah, but she wants to take custody of the children.
Miss Jackson is not a blood relative, correct?
No, she's not.
Thank you. No further questions.
I just have one question. Ms. Harrison, you mentioned that Sissy on and off lived with you from the point in time when she was actually separated from her sisters, correct? And she was 10 then, and her sisters were younger than than her, I'm sorry. Right?
Yes.
So, would it be fair to say, and I believe that Ms. Pasha states, at least intimates to it in her report, and that's what I'm trying to figure out here as the judge, with Lorraine, your daughter or granddaughter?
Granddaughter.
Lorraine was your granddaughter, so Lorraine was abusive, but the father and boyfriend were abusive. So it seems to me, but I didn't get direct testimony from Sissy about it, maybe you know, that she actually took care of her younger sisters, I believe.
She did.
She did. So, and she probably took care of them from when they were little toddlers, just the way that her daughters now are toddlers. And she took care of both of them.
That's true.
Thank you. So obviously, we don't have time for closing arguments. So let's do this. Take like the first half hour, maybe at the most, of Thursday. Anyone that wants to do a closing argument can do a closing argument. We can sort of review 2 questions for all of you to think about. Should the department get, permanent custody as a result of the C&P, and then further take that further? Should the department has the department also met its burden that it would be in the best interest of the 2 little Harrison children to be adopted, for Sissy's parental consent to adoption to be dispensed with? So think about those 2 questions, all of you, and then whoever is an attorney, be ready to do your closing argument. And then we'll stop the CRA. I keep saying